Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Beautifully Broken podcast. We're here for a second time around. Sometimes when you start a podcast, it'll go for a few minutes and you got to reboot because there's an audio error or a video error. But I really think that's good luck. So we're ushering in our jump in the timeline with Reverend Cathy Whelehan and Laura Young. How are you doing this morning?
Doing pretty darn well. Thanks, Freddie. How about
pretty
yourself?
Darn well. Let me feel into that for a second because we're going to talk about feelings today. I'm feeling inspired. I am feeling full of gratitude. I am feeling embodied, and I am feeling joyful this morning. Yeah.
So good.
Yeah. And I've got all my feelings and needs already pulled up on my computer. I have to ask you, ladies, could you describe the work that you do in the world with your organization, your platform, Be Loved Now?
Yeah. Well, Kath, you had started before, so you were on a train of thought. I'm not going to repeat.
There's many different things that we do in the world.
Yeah.
So the reason why it's Be Loved Now is because in essence, whether we're running a 12-week meditation program or a year-long program or a breath and cold workshop
or spiritual counseling
with
clients.
an individual,
Yeah.
we are reflecting back to the person or the people the truth of who they are. Is really what our intention is and how we show up. And we do it in a myriad of ways, but that's why it's Be Loved Now, the love that you are at your essence.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, that is beautiful, and it is what you do. And it's. I didn't want to tell the audience what you do. From my experience, what you do is when I have a problem that I can't work through, that is rooted in some type. Let me say this: it's like a tension of knots in the emotional intelligence of my body, and I can't break through the wall. And I'm like, I gotta call Cathy and Laura because I gotta talk this through. And so we'll work through. Very matter of fact, what are you feeling? And what are my core needs that are not being met? And let's come up with a dynamic phrase that helps you experience that and try it on. And then once you do that a couple times, you let it work into your body. How does the issue now feel? Is there any charge diminished? Is there a new way of thinking that you might be approaching this problem? And what I found is it's just a very effective, simple. This is one tool that you use to be able to sort through people's bullshit. I have often had times in my life where there's so much going on, whether it's I want to take all the things that I think I know or I understand about the health of a person or my body, and then there's this other context about what's going on in their interpersonal, their social connections, and over here, so it all gets a little overwhelmed. And I found the work that you do with really, you're like a spiritual Sherpa. You're helping, which there's tons of physical overlap. I'm less and less convinced there's some sort of line between the physical and the emotional body. That it's been really effective for me. So I like to say spiritual Sherpa. So that's how I describe you usually.
I like that.
I actually think I'm going to try that one on for size.
Yeah, spiritual Sherpa. Albeit, we could argue that. Yeah, we could argue that. Well, the word Sherpa is that. Did I culturally appropriate that word? Did I take that word for my own? I always say Sherpa is a word of admiration, like the strength and the impact coming from a relatively small human being that can shoulder 8 times their body weight and walk up Everest. And it's always like a thing of, wow, that's incredible. And so sometimes the work that you do is similar in that way. Do you have thoughts on using the word Sherpa and making it your own as white women?
Well, the first thing that comes to me, Freddie, when you ask that question is I think about the fact that many people have not been taught the skills of how to learn how to articulate how they feel and what they need. And so my experience in working with people, including people in my own family, that they regard their feelings and their emotions as somehow like this mountain behind the door, this, right. And well, really, and so to be able to access that, the skills needed to access that is something that needs to be taught.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the work that we do, is that people don't know how to do these things, to identify how they feel and what they need. They somehow think they should know it, but it's actually a learned skill.
Yeah.
So in terms of the word Sherpa, it's something I've got to sit with. I hadn't really thought about it the way you're using it. So we'll get back to you on that.
Yeah.
I would add, yes, and there's something about we're not carrying other people's emotional loads
Or teaching.
And I think Sherpa, from a very practical standpoint, a Sherpa is carrying your, right? And I would imagine there's a little nuance to it from where we stand, in that we might help you to carry it for a bit, but ultimately it's your responsibility. Each of us have the responsibility to carry our own emotional, mental load, all the things. Right. So that's why we say reflect back to you. Right. And I think there is a quality. Now, I haven't climbed Everest, and I've never had an actual Sherpa. You sort of have in Patagonia.
Yeah.
I would imagine that in the exchange, energetic exchange of them carrying, right, that there is absolute reciprocity, even if you don't speak the language, that there is an exchange and a learning going on for you as the person who's being relieved of some physical burden and carrying. So I think it is an interesting term, and I also want to sit with it.
Yeah, it is interesting. I say that it's come up a couple times. It was as you know, and you're also certified Sherpa breath and cold instructors as well.
That's true.
I mean, we could why don't you, there's other thing. You guys are quite dynamic women. I mean, Cathy, again, in our first 2 minutes of podcast 1, which went south because the audio wasn't right. And I just wanted it to be, I want this to be, I want it to sparkle like the work that you do sparkles in the world. So I wanted to do a reboot. You've been on the podcast before. Your daughter Allie has been on the podcast before. There's a little bit of some of the audience might know you from other episodes, episode 1 and 2 with your husband Scott Whelehan, and then Allie talked about her journey through Lyme. We need to have Quinn on at some point because he has an incredible story. But what do you, if I asked you, like, Cathy, what do you do? How have you cultivated this skill set in the world? What are you certified in? What might you tell me if we were just kind of having a couple minute conversation?
Well, I would say for right now, I show up really as an interfaith, interspiritual minister in running the co-founding and co-leading Beloved Now. I also run a healing sanctuary at my home in Redding. So we provide so many different things that it's hard to kind of pinpoint it. But again, all of the things feed into this idea of companioning people in becoming the fullest expression of themselves. We're always in a state of becoming. Yeah. So how do we want to do it is the question.
Yeah.
So there's different ways, different access points in. Like if you ask me, okay, so we do a lot of cold exposure with clients, spiritual counseling clients, with workshops, all the things. Sometimes with ourselves, we have a very dedicated practice. And that is one of the things that we feel turns the needle immediately for people. Yeah. So when you have someone
pretty direct shifts.
So if you have someone struggling with addiction or serious PTSD or something
or anxiety,
we've been working with them, we can't get that. Like that can create that experience in cold water can create just enough of a shift that then we can come in with the other tools and be like, okay, now, let's go.
I agree with that. It creates that opening, right? Yeah.
We find that more than, and we do all sorts of things. We're biohackers or whatnot, and we do all sorts of things for ourselves, but we also offer those things to people.
Yeah.
With the amp coil and infrared sauna and the cold plunge. So we do feel, I would say, when we speak about it, very committed to being integrous. It's like, I don't ever want to speak of something or tell someone to do something that I'm not doing.
Right. It actually goes back to, your question about the mountain and, the conversation we had about carrying. And I said something about, it's about teaching and learning. It's also about we model. We don't ask people to do anything that we haven't done, whether it's teaching the feelings and needs practice, the skills of compassionate communication, the self-care practices,
Meditation,
journaling, all of this.
Yeah,
like we do these things. We're not asking people to engage in processes and practices that we're sitting on some kind of pedestal and saying, you do this while we sit here. We're in it with our clients. We're in it with the people in our programs, in our workshops, all of that.
Yeah. And I mean, because I know you personally and because I've even, oh goodness, like I spent, I had a hideout in Redding, Connecticut for a year and 3/4 of the pandemic. I got to be in the family units of both of you to a degree and really see
all the mess. And
I know a lot of the mess. Yeah.
Yeah. I know the mess. And at the same time, like, I think, again, it's great context for my belief in your work because I know you've not always had easy things to work through. It's really, it's really interesting. So because I use you so much as a tool, literally there are biohacking tools which I go to. I have high-powered PEMF, I have amp coil, I have Flowpresso, I have saunas and cold, but I use Beloved Now often. Daily, identifying like, and what it's done for me is, I think this is a great spot to really get into some of the conversation that I want to have is we can always make the shift, right? We've got these great tools to make a shift. Like, let's just use ice. But if we're just going to the pattern interrupt again and again and again, it's really, there's not a lot of service there. It's like within that space, how are we getting in and really, just better knowing ourselves, better knowing my response, my tendencies to bypass the truth of the moment. And for me, the expanded vocabulary around feelings and what my core needs are, that's where the true healing happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would add to that that ultimately we need each other. So here's the thing. You can do all those things. Freddie has all the tools, right?
And knows how to use them.
Them very well. So you might even pay him to guide you in how to use all the tools. Ultimately, if you're in a family situation and you are engaged in conversation and you have a trigger or a reaction to something, there's probably 99% of a chance there's not an ice path next to you to hop into to change your response. Yeah. In other words, we are with people all the time interacting. And what happens most of the time is that people take on other people's stuff in a variety of ways.
Or project their stuff out onto other people.
Right.
Yeah.
So the Beloved Now tools are very practical, immediate things to do in the moment while anything's going down to be with ourselves with love.
Be with ourselves with love. And also it functions as a process to really disrupt the patterning around negative coping skills, really is what it comes down to. Like disrupt the patterning around belief systems that are limiting.
And keep us looping.
That keep us in the loop, that have generate a story.
Yeah.
That keep us looking for evidence to support that untrue belief system.
Yeah.
Right. So we're dealing in the facts. Like, what is the fact that's created, the facts of the thought or the behavior that's creating the feeling that's coming from either needs that are being met or not met?
Yeah, before we get too into the weeds, let's do a real life example. Just because I want people to, I'm like, oh, what are you? This seems like 2 steps away from me understanding what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
I had went to, I'll use, I won't do any names, but I'll use an experience I had like a month and a half ago in which there's another a wellness person podcaster who had posted this meme of a family holding hands, and they're holding up an umbrella, and there's this like a rainbow hitting the umbrella and bouncing off. Like there's like pride. The father figure is saving his family from the rainbow, and I was so activated. I was so angry because and I went at this. I went at the chat a little bit with this guy. I was like, man, what are you doing? I'm like, this is terrible. What are you saying here? I'm not even going to go into what my perception of what he was saying, but it really activated me because I saw that, and I saw hate. I saw fear. I saw aggression. I felt how irresponsible, as a person with thousands and thousands of people on your platform, to post a meme. I was like, how can we assume that there's like some shared reality around your meaning of a picture, which could mean 1,000 words? That could mean anything. Maybe it wasn't the way you meant it to be, but I just got so pissed. And
Yeah.
and I mean, really pissed. I was like, my heart was going. I kind of dropped everything else I was doing in the day. And I had called you both, and I had said, man, this is really coming up for me. So we had worked through like a feelings and needs statement based on my trauma response to this, like my rage. I'm like, how can a healer have put out a public opinion that is loaded with hate and loathing and fear of other? How can this be? So I had crafted a statement, and Cathy. So can you explain to me like how you would meet this situation where somebody comes in and they're hot and fiery and activated? It's like, what do I do to process this?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, first of all, as you were speaking, we established that you were making a lot of assumptions.
Tons. It's a picture.
Yeah. So we go to the facts.
Yeah.
We go right to what happened. So you crafted a statement that's looked something like, when I saw the meme, right?
Yeah.
That's it. We don't need anything else.
We don't need all the extra embroidery, right?
Right. Well, give me an example when someone adds additional storylines and assumptions to that, and you would stop them and say, "Oh, wait, you're in story."
Well, you were just doing it. You said, I can't believe what, so it would be, maybe you said, I saw this meme, and how could a healer,
how could a healer put out everything that has to do with hate and fear and and you kept going.
We'd say, okay, Freddie, we're going to stop you there. Let's dial it back. What are the facts without your story?
Yeah.
The fact is you saw a meme and you had a reaction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let's go to the reaction and dig underneath what the actual feelings are.
Yeah.
Right. So when I saw the meme, I was agitated. I was angry. I was exasperated.
You felt angry, exasperated. You felt.
Yeah, I felt I wasn't the thing. Right. Great course correction there. Yeah, I felt angry, exasperated, indignant, outraged, because I have a need for safety, for protection, for inclusion.
Mm-hmm. I'd also just put out there for you to consider, might feel right, might not, responsibility or accountability, because there's an aspect to it that you seem to feel very passionate about what that thing could then do, without taking responsibility for it. A picture, what's the saying? A picture is 1,000 words or something.
Picture's
like
1,000 words, million words.
So if we have a need for responsibility and accountability, that's kind of, you bring that in your world, right? You bring that in your podcast. you're wanting to, you show up the best you can, taking accountability and responsibility for yourself. So in that way, there's something about that might be a need that needs to be met. I don't know.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, and this is actually when we get to the needs section, this is where we can actually work with people and help them understand that they're responsible for meeting their own needs, or for asking other people to help them meet those needs. And in the way that you are of service in your podcast, just as one example, to a large degree, you are meeting your own need around responsibility and accountability. You're setting an example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
listen,
it's your inclusion, and the inclusion, like you welcome everybody in.
Yeah. I'll say that. I mean, I don't, I try not to get hyper political on the podcast, but man, I'm just such a strong believer, and you should be able to pursue love in whatever form, as long as it's safe to yourself and others. Like go. I wish all people joy in that aspect, and don't pretend. I don't even know myself that well, so I am certainly not going to tell you what to do with your love life, or commentary on, like, again, there was like another situation. It's funny. There's a theme coming up. Are you getting this, Cathy? So there was another situation that was so activated, and a guy got on the phone, and like he wanted to color my understanding of like a relationship a friend had with a woman. And he was like, this is dirty. It's disrespectful. It's sinful. And I was like, what, bro, what you're telling me right now is like, sounds sort of hot to me. I'm like, I don't know if we're going to label that sinful, but he was like, kind of, it was very, it was like leading the witness, So there's a theme here on people really trying to control and color your experience. And they're trying to lock you into it. I think that in that particular instance, it was another person who's very famous. They've been on Oprah, famous writer, in which they wanted me to agree. They said, make an agreement that we'll not talk about this, but they wouldn't tell me what I was agreeing to first. And then we walked into story. And when we got into the story, it was a terrible secret that I didn't want to keep. And I just felt sick to my stomach.
Right.
I've been walked in
the agreement, please.
Can we go back? I didn't know what we were going to talk about. You asked me to agree to silence before we unveiled the topic. And it was, I know manipulative is a victim word.
Right.
I know that's not a feeling, but man, did I feel violated after the phone call.
Right. But when we worked through it and we got to your needs, what we understand is that one of your needs, which you're working on, is making and keeping agreements. Yeah. And that's your job, to make and keep them with other people. It's up to us to decide what feels good.
Right. What's okay and what's not okay.
We make and keep agreements all the time. And if they don't work, we say, hey, so we made that agreement. Didn't go so well.
Let's do this. Would you be willing
to do another? What worked about it? What didn't? Let's create another, right? That feels really good. And that's the part I think about the practice that people don't necessarily, we say in Beloved Now, we go in to go out.
Yeah.
So it's really important to clean up this interior space again and again and again.
We call it patrolling the boundaries. Right? Set boundaries with your agreements, and then you patrol the boundaries. Right?
Yeah. And then we move it, because if we're always in a state of becoming, the boundary that we made or the agreement that we made a month ago might not be applicable anymore.
And people can surprise you too.
And people we want to hold out possibility for change on all levels. Right? We don't want to pigeonhole the other people. So the thing becomes, I can't do you. I can only do me. So I'm going to do me. And then I'm going to come to you and say, hey, this is me. These are my feelings and needs and what I'm working on. I'd like to move forward in relationship with you. And I'm suggesting these agreements. How does that land with you? That's a really powerful way to show up in intimate relationship, in business partnership, at work. We use it in our family. We use it in our business. We use it at AmpCoil. We
use it in our program.
Keep bringing it up, the program. So when people actually do it, like yourself, Freddie, on the regular, I would imagine, I don't know, you can speak to this, but I would imagine you would find that it is happening naturally. That it's like
flexing the muscle.
Yeah, it's like you will see something, you will meet someone, and it's like you work through it, you know how you feel, you know what you need, and you're not carrying all of that charge and yuck that lodges in the body and then becomes some form of, dis-ease or imbalance.
Yeah. It's really hard for me as I learn more and more about health. It's hard for me not to imagine how much of the maladies, the disease states are not just, how is it not triggered by an emotional avoidance or an emotional trauma? Or, look at the science around adverse childhood events. It's shocking. It's shocking. And not to say adversity is bad, not to say any of these things are bad. It's like The Thing. It's like, I wanted to comment before. I was like, at the time it was upsetting, and I felt very hurt, and I was very sad for a few days. I actually felt very unsafe. I was like, well, if he holds this opinion, the social influencer, how many other people in my container hold this opinion? And am I really, because it did feel like, I was like, oh, I don't really feel safe talking to anybody anymore. I had that moment where I was like, because I was like, you go back and you look at the comments, you're like, well, this person liked that post. This person liked that post. So you're creating, again, I'm in storyland. Story, not helpful. But I had this feeling of like, I was like, I was actively seeking. And this is like the very immature point of me. And I was like, well, I'll call Kristen, because I know Kristen will confirm my bias, and she'll agree with me, and she'll confirm that's wrong. And then I also love Lauren. So I'll call Lauren, and I'll confirm my story with Lauren that he is also wrong and he's a bad person. So I've watched myself do this, and I was like, dude, how old are you?
Right.
12? You building a team? You build.
But it happens.
Like,
this happens
pretty
all
normal
the time.
human behavior.
It's call it gossip, call it whatever you want.
Yeah.
I'd like you to, what we do is we set a timer for 2 minutes, and you can vent.
We call it conscious venting.
So I can say, hey, would you be willing to listen to me vent? And she'll set her timer. I did it last night.
Set my timer. You get 2 minutes, babe. Go.
And then we go, okay, now what? What do you want to do, right? We do need to express. And then from that, in 2 minutes, after 2 minutes, everybody's pretty much repeating themselves. I mean, even if the story is long and has a lot of components to it, the essence of what we're getting to, we can get to in 2 to 5 minutes for sure.
Yeah.
So I think, I'm very interested in how to continue to help people get clear. And I think one of the things that's interesting, and we're not therapists, but we have been in plenty of therapy. And I've had great therapists. I've had not so great therapists.
Yeah.
And I think the difference in what we are doing, in my experience, my lived experience, is that we are not pretending to be anything other than ourselves. So a therapist has certain ethical boundaries. They're not really supposed to speak about themselves, and it's understandable why and all of that. Mm-hmm. But what we're doing is we're saying, we honor your feelings. We're just not going to spend an hour talking about them.
Because it's energy in motion.
Not who you are. Not who you are at your core.
Nope.
It's just moving through you. So
passing through.
Let's help you move it.
Yeah.
To get to what it is you want. And that's what the needs are very much in tune with the values of how you want to become and live your life. Mm-hmm. So what we're very good at, to toot our own horns, is getting to the essence quickly.
Pretty quickly.
We don't need to stay with people for months and months and months. Mm-hmm. Then you can tune back in. Like you say, something will happen. You'll try to work through it yourself. You'll get stuck on one little thing, and you'll be like, hey, do you have 10 minutes for me? Mm-hmm. And literally in 10 minutes, we pretty much work through it.
Right.
That's not happening a lot today. There's a lot
of talking.
A lot of talking.
And a lot of repeating and looping that goes on. And what we find in working with clients, especially because we do a lot of the spiritual counseling, the two of us together, is that we get to the heart of the matter really quickly. And there's something about the two of us when we're working with the client. It's almost like immediate community. It's not just this one-to-one dynamic.
A lot less transference, a lot less projection, all the pitfalls of therapy that you have.
Well, you can do good cop, bad cop too.
Totally. Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, I was on a I do a lot of consulting stuff too, and it was like, man, 99% of the times it was like, you don't need business consulting, you need Beloved Now, because there's so much talking and so much story. And it's funny, unless people know they're going in to do that work, when I'm like, can I pause you for a second? You're caught in story, and they'll be like, oh, you don't. This is important. You don't get it. And I'm like, no, I do. I'm like a really good listener, and I'm like, we've already covered this. Minute 1, minute 5, minute 7, minute 9. Now we're revisiting it. Minute 14. I like take pretty copious notes. So I'm like, well, I'm just like, because I value my time, I've already got it. I know it's important for point 1, but yeah, I really find it's like, Dr. Nicole teaches this. They go through, they do personality typing, whether that's manifest generator, projector, human design work. They bring the energetics of the human being. They go through the core needs, core values workshop, and then they get into the business stuff.
That's
when
great.
They're working with integrative growth. They actually won't meet with you unless you make that agreement to do that work first.
Great.
Yeah.
Sounds effective for sure.
Yeah, it's effective. So so let's say we have an incident. Let's say we're working, we're doing the work. We have a thing. I call you with an issue. We go through feelings and needs. Then what?
Then we craft a plan.
Yeah.
Based on what you want. So it would be specific to the thing. Like it depends if you're having an issue with your
coworker,
lover, parent. It depends. It depends.
Let's do. I have a part. Let's say I have a make-believe partner named Samantha, who I'm having activations with. I'll say an activation, right? We have a thing in the kitchen. I get pissed off. I say something. We have an argument. I craft my feelings and needs. It's based around. Let's say it's alcoholic tendencies. I've got alcoholism. My father. I'm not comfortable with her drinking. So like I have the fight, right? I come to you to dismantle the situation so I can breathe and I can talk about it. Then how do I work with Samantha?
Well, we have to ask you some questions.
Yes.
What are your...
No. It needs to be the way for all alcoholic pattern through all relationships. It just needs to be a formula. I want a booklet. I want the workbook.
You want a canned webinar on that, Freddie?
Well, look, it would be very similar for each person. It's just that what do you say? Content process.
Yeah. So we think about, when I think about relationships with people and the conversations that happen, there's really what the feelings and needs practice really does is it creates a process to move through the messy. So I think of like everything that's going on in life is content, and the process to move through it is the feelings and needs practice. And that makes it really streamlined.
So it gets you quickly to what do you want. So if a non-negotiable, we have to understand for you, do you want, is no alcohol the baseline? And then in relationship, because we have to discern what are you okay with and not okay with. We help you to decide that for yourself based on what you're saying your needs are.
I mean, there's a couple ways that the feelings and needs practice can be developed when we're working, when a client is working with somebody else in their family or in their whatever relationship constellation they're in. You can ask if they'd be willing to listen to what they're hearing you say and to repeat it back to you.
That's a first step, mirroring. So if you can't even have the exchange and a person is not capable of mirroring back to you what they heard you say without more charge and more discord, things probably aren't going to move in a good direction. So
Right.
that's like a number one.
That's the number
Are you
one.
willing to hear me?
Right.
And would you be willing to repeat back to me what you heard me say? And
Right.
they don't have to get it verbatim. It's the feeling of it.
Right.
And then if they're off or they've forgotten something, there's a process where we check in and say, so did I basically get it?
Yeah.
And then you might say, there's one thing that you missed that's very important to me. And then you repeat it, and then she'll say, oh, okay, so here I'm going to repeat back to you the one thing that I missed. And then we can come to an agreement. Yeah, that feels complete, we say. That feels good. That feels complete. Okay, now what do we want to do with it? Would you be willing to enter into making a new agreement around drinking alcohol? And then you have to decide, like, is it just in your presence?
And you both have to agree. So it's going to be, it actually becomes somewhat of a compromise or a total compromise, because it's both parties have to be in agreement around what it is, that thing that is juicy and fiery, right? The thing that is activating. You both have to come to the table on it, you know?
And if there's not a willingness, that is information for you.
It is definitely.
Right?
Right.
You get to then decide based on that information. And most people, I think, have a fear
of confrontation.
And finding out that might be the case. And so they don't approach it because then they actually have to make a decision based on the information that they receive. And they might be attached to the relationship, a bit codependent, and they might be also addicted to the drama because there's a little bit of a charge that happens. They're drinking again, or they did the thing, and then they get to talk about it, and then they get to feel the dopamine and the whole thing.
It could be all self-righteous or whatever.
It could be so many things. So it comes down to, what is it that you really want? What kind of a relationship do you want first with yourself, right? Because it starts with honesty.
Yeah.
What are the facts? How do you feel? What do you need? That's honesty. And then what are you willing to do about it? Because that's the piece where you become very empowered.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean there might not be sadness around the choices
or deep disappointment.
But when we say yes to one thing, there's always something else that we're releasing.
Yeah.
So I think that's
choices.
Becoming. That is the process of becoming.
And Cathy and I have a term, WTF. And it's, what's this for? You know, it's transforming the perspective. What's this for? Actually, if you choose to believe, as I do, as we do, that everything in my life is happening in the service of my own awakening, then what's this for?
Yeah.
And
it certainly does. It certainly does complement a spiritual path to think about the waves that are coming from life as opportunities to have a different experience, for growth, for better navigation. Else you feel like you're standing on the shore just being pounded.
Yeah. Life is happening to me, not for me.
Instead of for me. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's,
we talk about victim to creator. That's the process.
But you're lucky enough. Here's the thing. And in my experience, you're lucky enough to make it through a really traumatic event, like a bad car accident or cancer. And you're lucky. Many people on the other side of that, your priorities shift dramatically.
Yeah.
So you have this deep gratitude for living and life and conversations and being activated and shit. I'm glad. How lucky that I had this day to be hit with another wave of emotion in which I get to grow and create from. And but I remember growing up, the chatter that filled many conversations in the room, in public school, or maybe in, being out in the world, it was people complained is almost like a default mode network. It's just like you complained about life happening to you. You complained about interest rates and,
like it was a badge of honor somehow.
like it's a badge of honor. So it becomes,
Justify that I have a hard life.
Right. It becomes just the boss is nagging you. I grew up in the 80s, so whatever it was, whatever the conversation was, but it was always a default mode network to complain. And until I had a different experience, I just didn't know any better.
Of course.
But it's been really interesting going through all the beautiful experience of cancer and Lyme disease and mold and surgeries have been, what a way to strip the hard drive and wipe it down and have another take, because my experience was so dramatic. Right. And not to say I had to come through that way. I could have very well been like, still waiting for life to get back to where it was, or my body back to where it was. But it just hasn't rolled that way. So I always find it's fascinating. And then, of course, me being this way, I've found I like it. And then I've self-selected other people who are around me to also view the world in a similar fashion, or we don't spend a lot of time together. I've organically cultivated a new community or a new universe gravitational field, and that's my life now. Most people I interact with, or even the landlord, that I live at the place where I live because the guy who built this property is just a great guy.
Right.
And so it's fascinating how you almost start to engineer your own world unknowingly. I wouldn't tell you I did this, but there must be some deep inner knowing in the body that says, man, this is a better way to do this life thing. Taking radical ownership of your feelings and your responses.
And I think that there's no, I don't think there's much of an argument that, for many of us who've had that dark night of the soul, right? It becomes a very clear, demarcation point to be able to choose differently. There's a lot of people who may not have had that experience yet in their lives. And yet, if there's a curiosity and a willingness to be open, even just a little bit, even just a little bit, the possibility to grow, the possibility to learn and to change course, if you will. You see it, for example, in the rooms of 12-step. Some people really want to learn and grow, and some people don't. And it doesn't really necessarily have to do with what they call the bottom, what kind of bottom you've hit.
Yeah.
It might, but it doesn't have to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It might. Isn't it interesting, just to speak to the 12-step program, and we've touched on alcohol a little bit. I am more or less sober these days. I'm like never. I'm like never. I can't remember the last time I had a drink, but it's super rare. And definitely have a unique experience in my family's history. I had said recently that it was like, wow, I look at my brother and sister, and we pretty much broken the generational chains of alcoholism.
Congratulations.
Like, organically, like we all just did it. I mean, I can say once in a while my brother and sister will have a drink, but from my understanding and experience, it's just not really a thing. We don't, that's not how it's not the, what is it? It's not the set dressing to family vacations and birthday parties and stuff. So it's so interesting that that's happened. Going into the experience of the 12-step program and story, is there anything you would do in a 12-step meeting if you could go in with a magic wand and say, we'd love to change this about the story? Because that sometimes in those programs we are, what is it? Is it incentivized to go into your story or to live in story or identify or attach with my dark night of the soul?
Yep. What would I do differently?
Yeah, what would you do differently, Laura?
If I could change. One of the beautiful things about 12-step, or in a lot of meetings, is that they limit the shares to 3 minutes. So that cuts down on some of the looping.
I'd bring this in.
Yeah.
I'd bring this in because I think feelings and needs are a way to access more of a growth mindset
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look, I've only done Al-Anon and the ACOA, so I haven't been in the AA just to see your anniversaries and stuff. But so this is her world. But my experience, because we do have a lot of clients that come from that, is that it reinforces telling that story like again and again and again, right? Like it's again a badge of honor. There's a little bit of this kind of like
yeah. Here's my battle experience, you know.
And what I'm not saying this about all people who are in the group, absolutely not. Yeah. But there's a shift now that I've really become so familiar with these 12 guiding spiritual principles, which, you know, they're not AAs, they're universal. And we've had many conversations about this, that the first 6, you know, honesty, hope, surrender, courage, willingness, acceptance, it's a fertile inner workings ground. It's like you're kind of composting your own,
you're going
right?
in.
And then from humility on to joy, it's really about taking this work and then becoming, in my humble opinion, of more service to the world.
It's expansion.
And that the service from the AA perspective seems to be very much insular. It's being of service to AA, which is wonderful. And what an amazing organization that it's all over the world, you know.
And it's free.
And all the things. There's so many fascinating things.
Still going.
Still amazing and helping so many people. And I would just simply say, I think there's an empowerment piece of you're talking about your own inner knowing. And there's an aspect, you talked about curiosity. We're talking about this growth mindset of what's this for. And I think that there could be a bigger or wider opening into that arena that's not just about giving over to a higher power, which is very much, I mean, I believe in higher power, absolutely. I believe also that the higher power is within us.
Right. They say in 12 step, I think you're taught initially, and not to dissect everything, but you're taught initially that because you've made such bad decisions, that's why you're there.
Which is important in the beginning.
That they actually, it almost seems as if the quote unquote locus of control is moved, so it's something outside of you because you need to follow the direction of the group, right? Of the literature.
In order to stay sober.
Yeah. At some point, you know, and in the reading, and actually in the big book, they talk about that, you know, we realize that the great reality is deep down within us.
Yeah.
Right? At some point, that locus of control changes. The perception of it changes.
Yeah.
I'm not sure everybody actually makes that leap.
Yeah.
And
it almost needs like you could almost envision like there being additional phases when somebody's ready for it to have that conversation or that invitation.
Like 2.0.
Well, and that is because the way the program works, you know, there's sponsorship. So that would be the job of the sponsor-sponsee relationship to have those kinds of conversations. Right.
Which a lot of times they will. Yeah. Like, you know, I know my dad is 20 some plus years. Yeah. And he will often, of course, he does his individual fingerprint on that human being when he's supporting. Like he's adding like that color and texture that a human being would bring. Yeah. Really interesting.
Yeah. It's like any organization. Is it evolving? Is it becoming? And is it growing?
I mean, yeah.
You know, and I think every organization has that opportunity to take a look at it. Like, do we have a growth mindset?
Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating. Like the world that we live in today and how we're, you know, these different institutions are stepping into different roles of service and how some have sustained over time and how some fall away. And it's wild. It's wild to think about. You know, I'd love to go a little deeper into, Laura, you said you're like, my dark night of the soul. Is that, do you want, can I ask you, what was you can give me like a 10-second explainer, your dark night of the soul, or you can give me like a 2-minute if you want. I'd love to. We've never really talked about your dark night of the soul, and you also don't feel obligated to share
I am an open book, Freddie.
Yeah.
It's a good one.
And it's a good story. I'm just thinking, where should I? So I was an active alcoholic from the time I was 15 until I was 42 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty serious. A lot of consequences. My bottom kept increasing. I've been to a number of rehabs and outpatient programs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I had started going to a 12-step program about 3 years before I actually did get sober. And I could string together maybe a couple days or maybe 2 weeks at a time, but I never could stay sober. And I always felt like it was my failure. I didn't really get the fact that it was a we program, that I needed community, even then. The dark night of the soul came when I decided that I was a failure and I couldn't do this anymore. And, without going into all the details of it, I went to a place that was fairly isolated. I mean, it was in a town, but I called my therapist. I said, thank you, I don't need you anymore. Threw the phone out in the backyard. I drank all the booze that was in the house, and I prepared to take my own life. In the process of doing that, my husband at the time, I think at that point, maybe phones had locator GPS. I don't know how he found me, but he found me. He came rushing in the front door to stop me from what I was doing. And I begged him to let me finish because I couldn't live with the drinking, and I couldn't live without it. I was so sure. And I was in that impossible situation. Now, so what happened is he took me to the emergency room at the local hospital, and they put me in the drunk tank of the emergency room in this the tank in the glassed-in observation room across from the nurse's station. And there was a clock on the wall. And I came to at some point, and I was wearing a hospital gown. I had no clothes, no shoes, no money, no keys, no ID. And the first thing on my mind when I woke up was, how the F am I going to get out of here and get a drink? Something happened in that moment where it was as if what I said, because I said it out loud, it was as if those words were thrown up into the air in front of me, and I could see them. And something about that moment, I suddenly grasped the first step of the 12-step program, with that I was powerless over alcohol and my life was unmanageable. I could see the insanity of what I was doing. And something flipped in me. I think it was, I grasped my own inner knowing. Yeah. I had had moments of clarity over the years. You pull that bottle of vodka out of the freezer and take a hit off of it before you go to work in the morning. Your life is going to change forever. Oh yeah, it's probably not a problem. I always thought I could manage the consequences. Mm-hmm. I got to a place where I was completely stripped down. Yeah. And the rest of it is, the journey to get here right now.
Yeah. Did you two know each other in that time?
I always say what I wouldn't do to be like a fly on the wall at the bar or wherever, But
oh my God, that was 2005. Just for some context, Cathy and I,
we met in 2007.
Yeah.
Beginning of teacher training.
Yeah.
The one thing I just wanted to add, it's your story.
Yeah.
But it's almost
you've heard it.
The interview question here, for me, is this moment of clarity. And, we have clients that are in active addiction.
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm always in that process of finding the boundary and also the compassion.
Yeah.
And what I have come to understand is it is a disease. And
chronic, progressive, incurable.
And that actually...
fatal, actually, as they say.
You are not the disease. And that is just such an important distinction. That is part of how this connects to Be Loved Now.
Yeah.
Because we say the truth of who you are. And so in the moment, it's you up until that point were saying... There's something really I am bad to the core.
I'm bad to the core.
What I mean?
There's something so
There's
wrong
no
with
way
me
out of this.
There's no way
That's
out.
really the dark night of the soul, right? And there's a little bit of an opening in that moment where you are able, it seems to me, to see, it's a disease and I'm not the disease.
Right. There is a
There's a way out. And so that's what I find really remarkable. And it feels like that's the part that ties to today, because this is what Be Love Now is.
Yeah.
You're not your story.
Yeah.
You're not your
mic drop.
Yeah.
I am not how I feel. That is not who I am.
Terrible things might have happened to you.
And terrible
Most
things
of them
have happened
to all of us in some ways.
Real tragedy has happened. Real trauma and tragedy has happened in my life, in other people's lives, in most people's lives.
And we don't diminish it.
No.
Well, how many people, I always think about this, how many people are sober or not drinkers, but their families are victim to the other side of a drunk driver?
They say that that for every alcoholic impacts at least 6 people.
Yeah.
The lives of 6 people.
Yeah.
There's
I'm just, it's stupid lucky. Like that, I always think of. Do you ever look back on your life and there's like events where you could imagine you're like, oh, that could have went. My life could be. I could be easily been. I could have spent my life in prison multiple times. That there are in the timeline. I'm like, all I needed to do is have this not go this way, or this police officer not let me off, or this. There's a shit ton of them, and all of them colored through really bad decisions because I was not in my right state of mind.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know how to manage myself, as a kid, as a teen, as a young adult. But you add alcohol into the mix where, I'd never learned how to, manage that altered state. And it's just like recipe for disaster. You're just lucky. I'm like, man, it's just a total lucky shit show to make it to your 40s or 50s.
I feel incredibly lucky and grateful that I got sober.
Yeah.
And I'm also really, one of the things that I learned along the way is I'm also very, I've come into a profound sense of gratitude for everything that's happened in my life. Because without the experiences that I've had, I would not be where I am now.
Yeah.
And continuing to become more and more of the love that I truly am in my being.
Yeah.
And I think for the listeners, it's like we say everybody's recovering from something.
Absolutely.
I mean, the
whether
human
it's
experience is challenging.
Like you said, trauma and tragedy.
And it's also incredibly
Beautiful.
Amazing and beautiful and joyful. And what we do is create a container in which to hold it all.
All of it.
Because it's not about only choosing the people who believe what we believe and surrounding ourselves. Yeah, we get to make really good choices, Freddie. You're making super great choices in your life.
Yeah.
And we also want to continue to be able to connect with anyone. For you, with the dude with the rainbow umbrella, went and connected. It might not be that you're going to join forces again in some way, but who the heck knows? You were able to craft a response that was true to yourself. And there was something in it that I'm sure was an opportunity, whether that person is saying, hey, thanks for the whatever, but we want to show up in the world again and again from our place of love and values. And we're not always going to be surrounded by the people who agree with us or think the way we do, right? Even in our own families. Yeah.
No, that's
So
there's this
tools.
So true.
The tools to be able to connect first with ourselves around what's uncomfortable, because discomfort, if we could lean into it and remember, oh wait, this is just a part of life.
Right.
We will feel uncomfortable on the regular. It's our job to transmute the discomfort and realize what it is for in our own growth and becoming. So,
I would agree.
So I don't care whether you're an alcoholic of however many years or
sober alcoholic
of many years, or you're, living in Kentucky and just got wiped out by a flood, or you've had a wildfire and lost your home, or you had, terrible sexual abuse as a child, cancer,
chronic illness,
Lyme. I care. And also in some ways it actually doesn't so much matter. it only matters in stating the truth of it for yourself in order to work through the feelings to get to the actual gold.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think society, because of the complaining and the badge of honor and ancestry and all the things that we bring forward, has really taught us that thing of like, well, let me tell you about the thing, and let me tell you again about the thing, and let me tell you why that thing has caused me to have all the problems and all the stuff. And now we realize actually that we have the power to transform the stuff in the moment. That is one of the most empowering things that has come to me in the last 4 years, because whether it's in my marriage or with my children or whatever, I'm in the moment saying, this is an opportunity.
Right. Like, wait a minute, right here, right now.
This is the work.
This is the work.
Yeah.
And this is where I can shift. This is where I can choose to respond differently.
And the ice can help, and the meditation helps, and the journaling helps. All the things help.
Community.
There's all these different access points in, but we need each other. We cannot be vulnerable alone.
That's how we met. Was with conversation. Like, I can be as honest as I want to be, as possible for me in my journal. But if I am unwilling to share where I'm really at with the people I trust and love in my community, then I'm going to stay in that little space and I'm pretty much stuck in that. Right? It's not going to shift. I'm not going to shift that on my own.
Yeah.
Probably not. My experience is never.
Yeah.
But when I share it, people are willing to receive it, are willing to ask me questions about it, and help support me in greater growth and expansion.
And it gives them permission to do the same. So we create a community that is actually inspired by the practice.
Right. The practice of vulnerability, the practice of this kind of vulnerability, creating connection through trust.
Yeah. It's really interesting now, the world we live in today, it's like we have to go out and build and seek these communities, because the design of, the world's just so big.
Or transform our families.
Society has just changed so much. The community, because you would have lived in a tribe, 400 or 500 people, 1,000 people. There were probably different checks and balances existing within this ecosystem that have left us, because I could go days in this box working from a screen and a Zoom and interrelating digitally, which is very, very different from being. I tell you, one of the coolest things we do at my neighbor's house, we all go and we built the guy who built this property, Michael Lubitz, master builder, built Deepak Chopra's first home. He's just such a cool architect. We're converting the outdoor grain silo into a 1-bedroom apartment right now with a spiral staircase. And it's got like the grain silo is like a crystal roof. It's so cool. I say all that to say, in his building, they've converted like a horse barn into a biohacking center, and we have a 12-person ceremonial grade sauna. And the conversations and the things in and out of to the heat, to the ice, and we just show up and sweat and we sweat and chill. And the conversations that happen in the sauna, you find yourself often like riding that edge of I'm going to pass out in the heat, because the conversations are like so intense and heartfelt in this bubble of community. Like, people are on this earth element of being like in pain, and what people say, it's so dynamic and so good. You don't want to leave the heat, but you're like, I'm going to pass out. And then so you transition into the cold, and that takes you to another level. So I watch this happen. I'm like, wow, it's almost like we're on the wash and spin cycle of healing right here, of all this stuff coming out of the body.
That's
and
so cool.
It's so cool. It's so cool. I was like, man, this is nothing short of medicine. It's not, you see people, you see lately I've been saying, I think one of my embodied missions is to remove the marketing from the wellness. Like, where does it really meet the human tissue and the human heart? And I've witnessed it enough to see, as you know, Cathy, put a person that's sick with chronic Lyme disease alone in a room for 4 months with an amp coil. Maybe you get good results, maybe you don't. put 12 people with chronic Lyme, debilitated, can't walk, can't drive themselves, in a barn with 12 other people for 3 to 4 months, and you get magic at the end of the cycle, because there's that element of, wow, they're in the room where it's happening, and through community, they're witnessing the subtle nuance of change in the other people. So it's like, don't be angry that your little experiment didn't work in a double-blind, placebo-controlled study. So for me, double-blind, placebo-controlled, it's like, well, did you want to remove the humanity from the healing element, or do you want people to get better? Do you want to realize someday that treatment room and the segmented nature of medicine is not working, or do you want people to get better? Like, look at, it's the system you built. It seems to not be functioning very well. So let's look at a different model. That's my TED Talk.
No, I love it. That's what we have come to, is that the exponential growth and expansion comes by sharing in community.
What she said.
You got to clean this up, and it's a continuous process.
Yeah.
Right? We don't just like, oh, I did that work. You hear people in spiritual communities, no, I've already done that. It's like, oh, so how's that going for you? Because we feel like we're just in a constant state of becoming. That thing came up again, huh?
Yes.
Guess it needs to be cleared, level of it.
And the beautiful thing about that is that in community, when you say that thing came up again, there's already a conversation that's been built around it. You can continue to grow the conversation, grow the dialogue around it. People have context. Have understand what it means. It's not like you're starting again with a new therapist where you have to give them the backstory. We have a common language. We can get to the truth of it pretty quickly.
Yeah. It's fascinating. Something I'm like, it's like I'm at the ceiling of a level of bursting through like another way of understanding healing, wellness, my role in the world. And I'm not, it's funny. I'm at an uncomfortable little zone that I've been saying. I was like, man, I just feel it's not that I'm bored with it all. I was like, okay, besides pulse magnetics and light and oxygenating the tissue and donating electrons, you're not going to come up with some dramatic, wild, device to like retrofit your genes and heal the body. I don't think, because we're trying to always remove this emotional component. It's like, yeah, we can add energy into the system, but you have this supercomputer, this human super interface taking in information, all these data points every minute upon every second, and then 90% of it is running on a program. So you're telling me the device is going to heal? I'm like, no. Of course it doesn't give you the same response across all platforms. I would hope it wouldn't. You're a unique component of emotional programming that's running under your level of awareness. So unless you're going to get in and do the deep awareness work, how long do you want to tread water for?
Right. Yeah.
When are you ready to heal?
Right.
And when would now be the right time?
When would now be, as our friend Aaron says. And I think that there is something we have to include in the conversation, some form of silence, some form of meditation in which we are experiencing the part of ourselves that is aware of our own awareness, that is able to notice and be the witness of the consciousness. We have to be doing something like that, because otherwise this mechanism is going to continue to override.
Because people are so caught up in, and we all have been there at some point in our lives, if not still there, that what I see in the mirror and what I hear myself saying and how I'm feeling is all that I am. When that is not at all. Who I am.
Yeah, you did your death episode, and you touched on that, right? It's like the consciousness part, the part that's aware. I'm in a book club with my dad, and we're reading Pema Chodron's new book, which is How We Live is How We Die. And she talks about the bardo, and there's that part of us. What's the part of us that doesn't die with the body? So meditation these practices give us a space and a container to grow into that experience, so that it then sort of just spills over into our life. So then we can be more present to the moments in the sauna or the cold plunge or the medicine and community that we're experiencing, or whether it's plant medicine or just the medicine of vulnerability, that we can then be, here we are, and we are present to it.
And then the question, what's this for? And can I love even this? Right?
Yeah.
Because then there's not an ego attachment.
Yeah. Yeah. It's wild to think about. My thought process wants to go in a million different directions right here. But, I get very caught up in wanting to know the whys and the understanding and what are we here for and what's my purpose, and that can spin me off. Historically, there'd been times in my life where I was like very much an existential crisis. I actually had one of my existential crises living at your house. I was not sleeping for 3 months, and I was just like, I was terrified of existing and not existing. There was a real, when I was doing music theater, I remember one time when the curtain would come down at the end and you'd be ready to bow and the lights were out and it'd be blackness before I would be streaming tears to walk out and bow, because I was like in darkness, and I was like, oh my, I was like, it was like, and it's 10 seconds, but the 10 seconds of darkness, I was like, the hearing people cheer and noise around me in darkness and knowing like that at some time I'm not going to be in this body form. I was like in the deepest, darkest sadness that I can still imagine. I can still feel it there. I'm like, oh, you've put a cap on that. You're periodically ready to look at that. But what is that? At the end of the day, we're gonna roll through the 100 years, or you're not stopping that yet. We're not stop. So it's you. Yeah, there is what I want to say is there is some point when you need to just say, I think there's value to say, I'm on the ride, right? I have very little control with how it's going or where it's going. The only thing I really have is I can choose to widen the gap between stimulus and response. I can color my response to some degree, the things that are coming at me, whether we want to say the rolling waves of life. Other than that, it's really like it's like the ego. It's almost like I look at the ego as winding down my clock of life, and it's like robbing me of time. Because within wanting to understand the present of presence, I'm wasting my life.
One of our yoga teachers used to say to us, life is a gift, it's not a problem. So take your body out for a test drive and enjoy the ride.
Yeah. Enjoy the ride. Enjoy the ride. And the veil is, it's we talk from this place of I'm sure people will hear this podcast and I've had people say, wow, you're doing the work. You sound like you've done a lot of work. I'm like, I feel awful at times and totally out of control and be like, oh man, I'm like, I'll just name, I'm like, oh, I'm 45. I have no family. I'm not married. I don't have kids. I'm like, so there's an element of that where I'm like, there was times where I'm like, I feel like a deep failure, and I'll sit with that in the morning, or you go out to dinner and you're like, oh, I don't have a family to go out with. Well, I mean, not a nuclear family, not an immediate family. I'm alone. And you can feel, what this is my story comes up as, look how you fucked up life. Like, how did you get here? So I have moments of being deeply out of control, and that's my work, to not let that idea or that thought process loop into,
running you.
Right.
Running me or whatever the dark thoughts on the other side of that wall. My point is the veil is fucking thin. It's thin for me. Like, it's thin for me to be like, oh, there's a lot of good. It can get real dark real quick. Real quick.
Yeah.
And how often do we choose to see those things happening as evidence to support the belief system that we are trying to justify?
Mm-hmm.
Which again, I just would come back around to embodied practice.
Right.
Because it's through the embodied practice that we are able to sit in the darkness,
the discomfort,
to sit in that
and the
very
uncertainty,
terrible place, and allow ourselves to breathe and remember that we're not the feeling, it's moving through us. Yeah. The veil is absolutely thin. So ultimately the choice becomes, well, how do you want to live today?
Right.
Because you have no guarantee you're going to wake up tomorrow.
Right. What do you want to do about it? Like, it's right. What is it that I want?
How bad do I want it?
How bad do I want it?
And what am I
willing to do about it?
Yeah. What is it that I want? I think that's a question that I, for whatever reason in my life, it's rare that I ask myself that question. I was like, what do you want?